Welcome to today's um, Jedi lunchtime live. I am Lori Porter, your partial host for the day. I believe that Coach Kemp Boyd may join me at any point on today, but we are certainly happy to have each and every one of you with us on today. The Jedi Council. Somebody might say, Jedi lunchtime. What is Jedi? Well, as you all may or may not remember, back a couple of years back, there was a lot going on, a lot of racial tension in our country as a result of a lot of various murders that had taken place, murders of Black men and women. And we were doing something called the Black and White Conversation. And from that, we decided that just having panel discussions and talking about the problem, perhaps some of our thought solutions, was simply not enough. That the only way we were going to truly make impact was to ask individuals to go along with us on this journey and take steps and measures that would make the most impact in our community. One of the things that we learned along that journey was Bishop Joey Johnson of the House of the Lord in Akron, Ohio, said to us that we can only move at the speed of trust. He shared, so that, let me just say that first of all, was an eye opener for many of us, because we realized after listening to Bishop that many of us, Black or white, were not able to advance many of our causes really because we don't trust each other. He also shared with us a statistic that said that 75% of white people, in this particular statistic survey taken, 75% of those white individuals that took the survey said that they did not have a meaningful, keyword meaningful, relationship with a person of color. We found that very interesting. And we at Love Akron, with our executive director, Coach Kemp Boyd, decided that we needed to do something about that statistic. How could we change the narrative of that statistic? There's our good executive director, Coach Kemp, right there, right now. Coach, so I was sharing with them how, Jedi came about, and the fact that not only did we have the conversations and the panel discussions, but we did something called next steps, because we realized that people had to do something more than just talk about it. In the community where I grew up, they say, don't just talk about it, you got to be about it. And so in other words, you have to do something about it. And next steps was our encounter where we invited individuals, whosoever will, to come along with us and to begin to dialogue about what we heard during the panel discussion 2 weeks prior. Well, I want to tell you that there's a group of folks that have been walking together for about 18 or 19 months now, and we have grown them. They've gone from being the next step group to what we call the Jedi Council. Coach, can you tell us a little bit about the Jedi Council for folks that are probably tuning in for the first time today?
Yeah, Lori, our Jedi Council is just kind of what you said it is. It's a group of people that have really said, I don't want to be necessarily a part of that 75%, but I think more than that, they say, hey, man, we want to continue to be the change that our community needs and needs to lean in. So it's a group of people that have, I think, made a commitment, if you will, to be intentional about getting together, having different conversations, and being just a little bit more relational. This is a relational process for us. And we always said that when we first started this, that we would never, if you will, put the microphone down when it comes to our conversations on race and on justice, on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so this is, if you will, the birthing out of us standing on that commitment in these people. And so they're our first class of Jedi. We want to be able to roll out a second class of Jedi. So we have some people right now that are going to be a part of that second Jedi class. And so we want this to be a continuation of really what was birthed out in this first group. And so we're really excited about it. And I think, when we talk about the Jedi Council, it's essentially about community, because what we have to understand, I think, intrinsically about ourselves is we all have a sense of belonging. And so this was a space of belonging for those people that are a part of our Jedi Council. And so we know that there's more people out there who want to be in that space to have a sense of belonging. And here's one of the questions, Lori, that we're asking right now. We're asking this question, and this is more of an ownership type of question, right? And we ask this also to our audience, and we're going to ask it to our panelists that come on today. How valuable of a community do we plan for this to be? How valuable of a community do we plan for this to be, right? And this is our Greater Akron community. It's like we got to ask that question because we play a role in that happening. And then here's the all-purpose ownership question. Okay, you ready for this one? It says, what have I done? Meaning Kemp Boyd, Lori Porter, individually, we got to ask ourselves this question. So we got to look at the person in the mirror looking back at us and ask this question to this person. What have I done to contribute to the very thing I complain about or want to change? Right? We have to be willing to ask ourselves this question. This is the question that we asked our Jedi Council. This is the question that we continue to ask ourselves as Jedi. What that has produced is us coming up with a vision and a mission statement. And it came up with us having core, if you will, attributes that we're going to live by being Jedi, right? By being Jedi. May the 4th be with you. Happy Star Wars Day to all those Star Wars heads out there. But what do we want to do? And so, again, I'm just going to ask this question to the public, to our audience. What have you done to contribute to the very thing that you are complaining about or you want to change? What have you done? There's something that we say at Love Akron. It's been the theme of our breakfast last year, and it will continue to be the theme of our breakfast this year and moving forward. And it's simply be the change. It's simply be the change. And if you've ever seen me out with one of my hoodies, shout out to Kenny Lambert over there at Just a Dad from Akron, man, who's a good friend and a brother of mine. It says, be the change, but under that Akron needs. How are we going to be the change that Akron needs? Well, it's going to be first us asking ourselves that question about what have I done to contribute, or what am I willing to contribute to make the change that need to be made? And in essence, Lori, that's really what the Jedi Council is all about. That's what we want to do. And these people, these individuals, very special individuals, have answered that bell. And so what they said is, hey, we want to continue the Jedi Council mantra by really identifying what does equity look like and mean in these different spectrums, if you will, or sectors that are going on within Greater Akron.
Yeah, I think, what's interesting, Kemp, is that this group is not just sat and talked, but you all have gone through a book together, had some very difficult discussions together, which speaks to Bishop's comment about that we can only move at the speed of trust. And we know that trust is only established when we build relationships. When you build relationships, the key word in what they said in that statistic was meaningful relationships. Yes. And when you build meaningful relationships with people that don't look like you, it helps to erase some of the biases that were, that we've adopted. And in some cases, we don't even know that we've adopted them. I think my favorite line that people say is, I don't see color. I'm like, you better see color. You better Absolutely. See color. Because if you don't see color, that's going to be a problem, because then you won't even understand when I'm talking to you from the perspective of which I'm speaking. And it does depend on which side of the tracks you came from. And so, we talk about entitlement. I'm just saying, I know we've got another class that's going to be coming up, but I want to encourage folks that, I'm an honorary Jedi, right? That means I get to come and go. But every time I come, this group of folks who are not just all Christian, don't faint, don't pass out. I know the Christians just passed out. What? You are building relationships with people that are not Christian? Yeah, we are, because that's what Jesus would do. So, yeah, but folks from every spectrum of life are part of this Jedi Council. And I encourage you that when they open the door and they take the next 15 folks for the next class, that you make it your business to become a part of the Jedi Council. The Jedi Council, the purpose of that council is to provide an opportunity to encounter individuals from diverse backgrounds in a quest for higher levels of understanding and connection. In our community, we have a commitment in Jedi, a commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We are committed to listening, to learn, and to lead responsibly, to address the 4 levels of racism as we have identified them. 1, internalized within us. Secondly, interpersonal between people. Thirdly, institutional within society and our organizations. And then fourthly, structural racism within our systems. We want to responsibly listen. We want to responsibly learn so that we can responsibly lead together. That's what Jedi is. Now, I know we could go on and on forever, but we've got some guests with us today, and I'm super excited about all of them. So when you look at Jedi on the flyer or the graphic this month, the E was capitalized because we talked about justice about a month or so ago. Today, we're going to be talking about equity. And there are various types of equity. There's what we would consider work equity. There's health equity. There's education equity. There's, did I say health? Health, work? Yeah, I did. So all different types of equity that impact and affect our community. I know that we have someone coming on, Nicholas, but I'm going to let Coach Kemp come back and introduce him. And he's going to talk to Nicholas about health equity and the impact that it's having in the Akron community. Charity begins at home. I know there's things going on worldwide and we're concerned about those things. But in addition to that, we have to begin to solve some problems at the local level before we can expand out and impact not just our community, but our world. Would you agree, Coach?
Absolutely, absolutely. And Nick, I appreciate you being with us. And Nick, man, listen, I'm gonna tell you right now. I'm gonna be honest with the audience. Nick was not on our headliner to do this, but me and Nick were in a committee meeting. I want to say about maybe 2-3 weeks ago, and Nick presented some drop the mic data. And during the meeting, I'm sitting there on Zoom, and I said, Nick, man, you got to be on because enough people are not aware about this data, especially what's happening going on as we talk about equity, because we have to, first of all, we got to define what equity is and what it means, but also where there are inequities, we need to bring on, if you will, we need to be able to shine some love and some light on that as well. So, Nick, thanks so much for being with us. Please let the audience know who you are, the organization that you represent.
Thanks for having me. My name is Nick Beckel. I'm the Research and Quality Improvement Coordinator for the Summit County ADM Board. So I handle all of, we call it deaths of despair data, so suicide data, overdose death data, and then I'm also responsible for all the agencies that we fund. They give us outcome data to see how their programs are running, and I analyze that as well.
Awesome, man. Thank you, Nick. Now, Nick, you presented. Now, I'm gonna try to bring this as much as possible. I know I got to get my friend on, Erica Glover. But Nick, I want to talk about the data that you presented to our Change Direction committee group 2 weeks ago, and it was alarming. It was discouraging, and it was hard the rest of that day not to think about or consider what's going on as we talk about equity, right? And how equity is affecting not just our health, but our mental health, and I don't know if we can share a screen on here or not, but Nick, could you give us kind of an overview of that data and what that data represented?
Yeah. So I apologize. I didn't know I'd have the opportunity to actually share my screen, so I don't have anything here in front of me, but yeah, so essentially, like the two big areas that I focus on, like I said, are overdose death data and suicide death data. And so we're really seeing shifting demographics in those areas. And so the one thing that when I presented to change direction that I really tried to focus on is kind of what we're seeing as far as overdose deaths. So, everybody knows, 2016 is when kind of the opiate epidemic, sort of showed up pretty quickly over that summer. Summit County had 341 deaths. And we know, primarily the opiate epidemic affects Caucasians. That's sort of, kind of what it's known for. It affected the white population more than other populations. And so one of the points that I tried to make on change direction is this change that we're seeing. So when we try to compare different population groups, we look at things called rates, and that helps us compare, different groups of different sizes. So for when we look at overdose rates, in 2016, when it was, like I said, we had 341 deaths, the rate for Caucasian males was 94.0. That's 94 deaths per 100,000 people. And from 2016 to 2017 to 2018, we saw a downward trend in the number of deaths. So we saw a decline in the rates across the board. So Caucasian rates went down, African American rates went down. In 2019, we saw an increase. Things started to trend back up. But what we really saw happen in 2020 was a huge sort of explosion in the African American community. So to give you some numbers, because I feel like I'm rambling here, I'll get to this. So in 2019, the rate for African American males was 39.0. Into 2020, that number jumped to 87.4. Going into 2021, it went to 94.7. So like I mentioned earlier, that rate we saw in 2016 for Caucasian males was 94. So the point that I really try to make is today in Summit County, overdose deaths are more of a problem in the African American community than they were at the height of the opiate epidemic for Caucasians.
So let's just think about this for a minute. So in 2019, the weight for Caucasian males was 94%. Nick, do you have? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. So in 2016, the rate was 94 per 100,000.
Per 100,000. And so now looking at 2020, that number shot up for African American males to 87.4% as far as overdoses, correct?
Yeah. So the rate went to 87.4 per 100,000. So that just means for every 100,000 people, 87.4 died. So that's kind of a rate of death. And then it jumped up to 94.7 in 2021. So the rate of dying from an overdose in 2021 was higher for African American males than it was for Caucasian males in 2016.
Wow. And to put along with that is the disparity of population, right? And Black males versus white males. So if they're dying at a more rate, and this is all speculation for not the data's not, but I think about why did it shoot up in 2020? And so for me, Nick, my thoughts go to everything that was happening in 2020, especially that kicked off that summer, the murder of George Floyd, those type of issues. And I'm like, man, where were we as a community in helping those that were underserved, right? Like, and again, the data to me is just incredible, but I can't help, Nick, but to go back to what was going on in 2020. And so along with the overdoses, the suicide rate went up as well also, right?
Yeah. So for the suicide rates, so the African American suicide rate is typically much lower than what we see in Caucasians. So just to kind of give you an example, like in 2014, 2015, and 2016, the rate never got above 6 for African Americans, where for Caucasians, it's around 20. In 2016, we did see an increase. In 2017, we saw an increase in African American suicides. It went up in 2017, kind of came down in 18, down in 19 again, back to where kind of that level we'd expect to see, less than 6. In 2020, the rate jumped up to 13.7 for the entire group. But then again, focusing on African American males, the rate for African American males jumped up to 26.9. That same year, the rate for Caucasians was 25.3. So in 2020, the rate for African American males was higher than Caucasians when it comes to suicide deaths. And if anybody follows kind of suicide data, typically when you think of suicide deaths, you're thinking of Caucasian middle-aged males. So the fact that African American males had a higher rate, to me, was pretty alarming. Now, in 2021, we did see a decrease. It went down a bit. The Caucasian rate was higher again in 2021, which is kind of what we expect to see. However, the rate for African Americans was 11.4. So it's, we're used to seeing something around 6. So it's much higher than what we normally see. And the rate for African American males themselves was 19.5, which is again less than what we saw last year for Caucasians, but much higher than what we typically see.
So what does this communicate, Nick, just from the seat that you sit in when we talk about equity? What is this communicating of what you're seeing and reading with those data, which for me, again, I learned about this 3 weeks ago when you presented it to us, but it's something that is stuck in my mind. So as we talk about equity, what did those numbers reveal, if anything?
So that's a really good question, because, a lot of what I do is provide the data for other people to make those sort of decisions.
Yeah.
But, from my perspective, it really is just so many things were developed following, like going back to overdose deaths. With opiates, there's all these different harm reduction things that are focused on opiate users, which are typically white. So, you have fentanyl test strips, syringe exchanges, all these sort of things that are out there that can help people. And what we ended up seeing really is changes in the drug supply. So, fentanyl is just in everything now. So if somebody is using cocaine, most likely there's fentanyl in it. And so you may not be aware that you're an opiate user, essentially. So a lot of the harm reduction, which was sort of focused, like I said, to opiate users who are typically white, we need to kind of expand those programs to everybody. Essentially, like if you are using any sort of, drug, any sort of, a street drug, and I want to be careful when I say street drug too, because a lot of people buy pills that they think are legitimate pills, and that's really not the case. In most cases, it's just pressed fentanyl. And so, we just sort of need to, some of these programs, like harm reduction strategies that have worked in the past, I think, we need to continue those, but sort of maybe focus on different demographic groups.
Wow. I appreciate that, Nick, because I think that is now there's so many different ways. And hey, for our listening audience, if you have any questions for that you would like for me to present to any one of our panelists, please share those questions with us. We want to be able to hear your voice in these discussions with our panelists. But Nick, man, I really appreciate you coming on. I know you came on last minute for us, but Nick, right now I'm going to tell you, man, you just earned yourself a job. So you're going to be like our correspondent every month to kind of come back if you could, just to give us some more data that maybe the people need to know and we need to have people become aware of, because you're absolutely right. When the opiate epidemic and the crisis happened, I remember, man, there was this huge outcry and rage. And let me just say this. I think initially it was because it was hitting the suburban areas, right? Like it was happening in the suburbs, right? In the Hudsons, in the Copleys, some of the Fairlines, and some of these areas. And there was this big outcry about it. Now it's happening right in our urban areas. So it's like I've always said, whether it's mental health or whether it's any type of substance use or abuse, that does not discriminate. It doesn't care how old you are, what color you are, what your gender is, what your beliefs are. Like it can attack us. And we have to make sure, man, that we're upholding our community the best way we can and all the people in the community. So Nick, man, before I let you go, man, is there anything else, man, that you feel is important for us to to know about some of the stats that you've shared?
Yeah, so I mean, I appreciate what you said too, because that's sort of the point I try to make when I always go back to 2016 is remember how bad everybody thought things were. The impact in the African American community now is worse than it was then. So that's kind of why I always go back to 2016, and then to kind of show you how the data sort of helps with some of the efforts we do here at the ADM board. Last year we had this a program. It was targeted naloxone distribution, and it came from the state. So essentially, the state came out and they said, "Hey, these are zip codes where we're seeing high rates of death. Here are some extra naloxone, which is an if you're not familiar with it, it's a drug to help reverse opiate overdoses." And so they said, we want you to distribute these naloxone kits in these zip codes, but they gave us. And they picked zip codes where the state saw the highest overdoses. Now the problem is their data is not as up to date as ours. They're about a year behind, but they gave us the opportunity to say, where do you guys think some of this should go? So we got to pick some of our own zip codes. And so at the time when we started seeing that increase in African American overdoses, a lot of that was coming from West Akron. So we chose West Akron as an area to use that initiative. The same thing we saw an increase in Kenmore, which you're familiar with Kenmore. So Kenmore was a targeted zip code. So this data, tracking it in real time, really does sort of help guide decisions that we make here at the board. So that's the point I like to make across, because I'm the data guy. So it makes me feel good that my work is maybe helping the community.
Absolutely, man. That's why, Nick, man, we got to continue to have you on, because what I love is how quick we were able to pivot, right? Like, and I say this all the time, we have to stop outsourcing our responsibility as a community. Like, the government, the big government in the state of Ohio is not going to necessarily know what's going on in Akron the way we do. Right. And so I love the fact that our data is so current that we were able to pivot, Nick, based on the data and the information that you got for us. So, Nick, thank you so much, man. And I want to give a shout out to Daryl Brake, Executive Director of Summit County Community Partnership, who I know passes out those kits and who I know is boots on the ground doing the work right now. So that's just awesome. Nick, man, thank you so much. And again, Nick, you've earned yourself a correspondence job, man. So we expect to see you back.
I'll be here.
Right, go ahead.
I had a question for Nick. From where you sit, speaking to people in the community that are watching today, what's the one thing that you wish we would do? What's the one thing that when you're looking at data and you're looking at what you see that comes across your desk, in your mind, you're like, man, if we could just do this, it would help us lower these numbers. We know get the drugs off the streets. We know that. But what else?
Yeah. So, and really, I guess the one thing that I would say, it doesn't really affect my job and the data itself. It's really just stigma, trying to reduce stigma, that people know that these resources are available. They don't need to feel bad by, asking for help. That's really kind of the one thing that, to me, because there's, when I look at the data on my end, we see, people taking advantage of resources. There's still some groups that are underserved. I mean, for example, like African American women, if I were to look at the percentage of African American women receiving services, it's way lower than their percentage of the population. So, but they're also, I mean, it kind of goes both ways. We don't see very many overdose deaths from them, and we don't see very many suicides. But I want to make this point too. Like when I said, in 2020 we saw that increase in African American males where it was higher than the Caucasians for the first time in a while, and that continued in 2021. We saw that with females too. We're seeing that increase in African American females. But essentially, my big takeaway would be do everything we can to reduce stigma.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Nick, if people are looking for resources or how to connect with that, would you be able to give them the website to the Adam board? And so if they're looking for anything, resources, helps for anybody in their community, could you just give the Adam board website to us, please?
Yeah, so the website for the ADM board is it's admboard.org. So it's pretty easy. If you go there, there is contact information for everybody that works at the board. So if there's a certain area, where you think, hey, I want to ask this person a question about this type of program, you can see everybody's title. Or you could email me directly and I can point you in the right direction. My email is nickb@admboard.org. And, I'm happy to help if anybody has any questions about some of the data that was presented today, or if, they need to talk to somebody else here but don't know who exactly to contact, I can point you in the right direction.
Nick, thank you so much for your time today, man. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.
All right, have a great one.
You too.
Well, Coach,
Man,
that was
Laura, I don't know
amazing.
about you, man, but that was some mind-blowing stats that people just didn't know. And again, what I love about it was the pivot of our county Adam board to say, hey, we have current data. This is where we need to send the resources at, and not going based on data that was maybe a year old or some months old, right?
Yeah.
Because the perception could be, Lori, correct me if I'm wrong, the perception could be, well, hey, you guys just don't care about people in this community. You're still continue to put all the resources in these other communities, but you're not concerned about what's going on in our community. And what we can kind of hear today is that's not necessarily the truth, because the Adam board was able to pivot to put forth the necessary resources in the community where they really need to go based on current data.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. That's amazing. Well, we got a lot of work to do, I'm telling you. Well, Coach, a friend of ours, we have a couple of friends out there, but Pastor Robert D. Jurnett is hanging out behind the scenes. Well, hey, Pastor, how are you?
Hey.
He is a friend to many. Many folks know him from SUMA. Another group of folks know him from the chamber. People in West Akron know him as pastor of St. Ashford Temple. And if you just grew up around or with him, you like me, you just call him brother. He's like family to everybody. Thanks for being with us today, Robert.
All things to all people. I think that's on his card.
That's it. Beautiful. Well, Pastor Robert, I know we called you to ask if you would talk to us about what we call work equity. And, we had a little bit of time to talk even before coming on today. And, when I think about work equity, and I know when you think about it, we think about creating an inclusive environment in the workplace. Can you talk to us about that? What does that look like? How do we create an inclusive environment in the workplace?
Well, Lori, thank you all for having me on. Of course, I love connecting with you all. And equity for me really is just really making sure that people have the same amount of opportunity to advance, which may mean adapting certain policies, practices, or procedures to meet the needs of the current environment, giving supports where supports are needed. And when we talk about creating that inclusive environment, workforce is like the top of the list for everyone. The Great Resignation is here, and it's hard to find and fill jobs now. But, some ways to really create that inclusive culture, because culture is what eats strategy for lunch. And you could have a dynamite strategy, but if the culture is not conducive, that strategy is going to be null and void. So just a couple of things to create an inclusive environment, for one, facilitate some unconscious bias training. And one thing, the goal of the training is to bring awareness of how, all of our biases can affect our decision making, and not to allow us to continually make excuses for our actions. That's one way. Another way is to create support employees for implementing employee resource groups. ERGs help identify real and perceived barriers within respective affinities, and also bring forth ideas to address a more inclusive approach that will bring added value to organizations, and its strategies and its missions. And another way is to look at marketing, make sure that's representative of everyone, and also sponsoring, sponsoring versus mentoring. There's a big difference there. Sponsorship, sponsors use their influence to open doors as allies for individuals, and mentors just give advice. But I'm a more proponent of sponsorship and mentorship, second to sponsorship, and really just having the initiatives led from the top on down, right? Creating that culture from the top down approach. The cadence has to be set with the head, executive director, CEO, to really establish what that cadence is.
What does that look like when you talk about mentorship in the workplace? In your experience, can you give me an example for someone that's watching that's saying, wow, I thought about that.
Again, mentorship is just having someone to advise you, help you along the way, to kind of show you the ropes. But sponsorship is really creating those avenues where you're going to open the door and you're going to sponsor someone and vouch for them to advance in the organization.
That's amazing. There was a saying years ago, it's not what you know, but who you know. And
Indeed.
It's really true. It's really true. And, you and I, again, had an opportunity, as I have with most folks on today, talk a little bit. But, there was a saying a couple of years back, people were like, I'm taking my talents to South Beach. I'm taking my talents to the West Coast. They were taking their talents everywhere. Why should people, and is that something that's happening? Are people saying, I'm taking my talents to Ohio? Are they? And if they are, why would they? And if they're not, why are they not, do you think?
Yeah, well, I would say they're not. The whole Elevate Greater Akron initiative was really to help us to be more inclusive in our approach as a community. And Akron really has a growth problem. People are not flocking to Akron or Ohio. They're going to different places. So, and Akron has been like treading water, in a sink or swim economy. As we look at how Akron ranks with the respect of the 100 largest metros and key indicators of success, a couple years ago, we were 89th out of 100 in job growth, and we were 72nd out of 100 in growth of young firms, which is critical to sustainability and competitiveness. So we really need to focus on what we have here as opposed to trying to attract talent, because we're not going to attract our way out of the issue or the problem, right? Large relocations are down 50% nationwide, and Akron is like 10 percentage points behind the national average in creating jobs, right? So we have to look at what are we going to do with the folk we have here? Because we have a great, I think, surplus of talent here. Akron is faring worse than other regions with respect to their ability to be inclusive, particularly as it relates to the Black population. Akron is in the bottom 10 out of the largest 100 metros with respect to growth in Black employment rates. And we're in the bottom 5 of 100 with respect to Black income growth. And the whole study of Elevate Greater Akron showed that the Black population had been excluded from opportunities. But we have opportunities here. We have underutilized talent that we have here, not just Black, but variety, right? Many people are struggling to fill jobs. Back in I think it was 2 years ago, we had about, and it probably is more now, 20,000 open jobs, and 7,000 of those required at least a bachelor's degree, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we fill those roles? We had 13,000 skilled people in Akron that didn't have jobs but wanted one. So, some people will say, well, they're not skilled enough to fill those positions, but each of these individuals had at least some college training, and half of them already had a 4-year degree. So we have talent here, but how do we tap into that talent? And that's the issue where we're at today. And how do we hone in and tap into the available talent we have?
Yeah. That's interesting too, because I just want to say to people that are viewing audience today, don't let anything stop you from applying, because Frank Lanciano, God bless his soul, but I remember working at the county in child support, and I started there as a temporary. And here's what was amazing. what was amazing was of 89 people working on arrearages, reading court orders, determining those kind of things. Out of 89 people, the auditor said, I don't know what y'all gonna do, but y'all gonna have to keep her because she's the only person that has grasped the concept of how to get this done, and she can do it quickly. And so there I sat in an office with people who all had a bachelor's degree, and I just had some college. And so I think to employers also, prayerfully they'll become more open to giving people a chance and an opportunity based on their experience, of course, right? I had some bookkeeping and record keeping in accounting experience, but I didn't have a degree. So that's amazing what you're saying. And I'm saying that to say to folks that are watching today, do not let the requirement deter you from applying. Let them tell you no.
Well, Lori, I mean, you hit a good point because many hiring practices have been criticized because of the way that those practices have been enacted, and now you see more folk eliminating unnecessary job requirements that promote bias. Right? Is the bachelor's degree really required or just preferred? Right? You're stopping some folk from getting an opportunity when they can actually do the job. Realistically, employers now are starting to evaluate the years of experience. Are they really required for one to step into that position? If they have experience in another area, can that translate? Right. And some pre-testing automatically eliminates candidates sometimes. So you have to look at the bias in that. And now employers are using a diverse set of interviewers to ensure that you get a more diverse perspective of the talent pool. So, and it's also about how do you get those opportunities out through the various networks, because approximately, I think it's 3/3, 75%, 75% of the jobs are never publicly posted, but are filled from within existing networks. So how do you extend those networks and create partnerships so that you are casting a wider net to get the best and the brightest?
Yeah. And I think when they're doing the internal, I can understand it. It takes a little less work because the people have sort of vetted the people for you a little bit by recommending them. But you are absolutely correct, Robert. I know that there sometimes, and you have helped me over the years, many, many different times, because there are certain internal inequities, I'd like to say, right? Certain things that happen within companies and organizations that are not fair. I know I'm going to bring on Tom Fuller and Tori Stokes to talk about housing equity and finance and housing equity. But one of the things that Tom and I talked about, and we're not going to bring him on yet, but when I get there, we will. But we talked about what would help people of color be able to move beyond, say, affordable housing into home ownership. And one of the things that we know is significant and most important is generational wealth. And, it starts with having a job, right? But then that's a whole nother program for another day, life insurance and things of that nature. I said, my kids, I hope they won't kill me off. Thank you, Jesus. But they'll be very happy. It'll be bittersweet, right? But we have to, while we're working, set those things up so that we can allow for generational wealth that will help every generation to follow. But speak to internal equity, the disparities that exist in that area, because there are tons of.
And again, pay and promotion sometimes is not equitable, because if you look at the stats of similar positions, when you look at women, when you look at African Americans, you can have similar positions. You compare those to those of the majority community, you can see the pay disparity, right? And then you have individuals who organizations will bring in at higher rates than people who have already been there, and they have to train those folks, right? So internal equity has to be taken in consideration if we're going to talk about equity, right? Yeah. Equity is giving supports to those who are disadvantaged and marginalized, or so that everyone can be at an equal status, right? But you can't do that because sometimes we assume everyone starts at the same place. But equity will help us get there, but we have to be more intentional about how do we provide those supports and address some of the barriers and challenges of that's preventing folk from being at an equal stance.
Yeah, because I could use myself or others as an example. As an African American woman, I'm an operations coordinator for a nonprofit organization. It would be interesting to see comparably what my white male counterparts make in that same role and position, same duties and responsibilities. And I think, for our viewing audience, that's what we're talking about today, that I still have the same responsibilities that any other human being has, to feed and clothe and have shelter and all of those things. And you're absolutely right that it is very difficult to train someone that's going to take your place, and they're making more money than you. And sometimes we don't know that, but then when we find that out, how discouraging is that? So it's more than, and that's why these forums exist. But I think I'm okay to say this. That's why sometimes I think folks are looking at people of color, and it's not a thing that people are lazy or that they are not good stewards over their money. And I can call me up on the phone. I'll give y'all some examples of times and places where later on in life, I found out I was making this and everybody else was making this. Are you joking me? I'm like, how does that even happen? So Kathy Bear says, how do we train employers to treat everyone equally without looking at color and hire based on experience?
My friend Kathy, thanks for that question, Kathy. And that's a great question, because now you see best practice is to have take the names off of the resumes, and so that you're not judging by a perceived unconscious bias, right? And ensure that the jobs you're looking for, what they bring to the job, as far as even when you create the job descriptions, don't create them for people, create them for what the job calls for. And those blind resumes, I forget what they call it, but looking at the resumes and taking certain things out that would identify people of color, because we all have biases, right? And they're unconscious for a reason. Sometimes we're not aware of our biases, so that's when they start to impact our decision making. When we if we are aware, then we'll know not to allow that to happen. But that's a great question. That's a great question that Kathy has.
Yeah, I love that, because you have to, some key you said is that you have to become aware. We can't remain in denial and say, oh, I'm not biased, I'm not prejudiced, no, we all have some biases. And so I love that you said that. In your closing, because we've got, amazing guests that are following. So if you're on, I don't know if we're on Facebook, something, wherever you are, however you're watching us, like and share this, invite someone to come along with us today as we talk about what's happening in Akron as it relates to equity. So in your closing concerning what we coined as work equity, Robert, what would you share with our viewing audience?
I would share that if we're going to move this needle, we have to be intentional and we have to be deliberate. We have to stop doing the things that we've always been doing. We have to look at the systems that are in place and how do we change those systems. It has to be at the systemic level. How do we change the policies moving forward? Because if not, we're just going to keep putting band-aids on things and not really making the change that we really need to make, and I believe that most want to make.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I know that you're leaving the chamber and going full-time pastorate, and how amazing. I mean, what a blessing. And that's another cultural thing that people may not understand. A lot of our white counterparts that pastor churches are not bivocational, not not largely as much as Black pastors are. And so, but Coach Kemp, are you coming in before? Because Coach Kemp loves you, and I love the fact that, Robert, when you talk about a sponsor and a mentor, I know that Coach is not from the Akron area, and he was new to Love Akron in 2019. He has taken the vision of Love Akron. And it always makes me think about Jeremiah when God says, "Can these dry bones live?" Not that Love Akron was a dry bone, but it was a skeleton. We had everything we needed, but we needed some skin. We needed to really be mobile. And I love the fact that he has come and kind of put skin on it. And we've got this personality in this face, because before we were known as the organization that prayed. And that's a powerful thing, and we still do. But I think you told Coach a long time ago, people don't necessarily want to pay you to pray. And
you don't find prayer.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know Erica from Akron Public Schools is coming up with Coach next. So I'm going to leave you two guys on the screen. But thank you again, Robert. It was great.
Thanks, Lori.
With you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you, Robert. Robert he's my sponsor and my mentor. So he serves dual roles for me. So I appreciate you, brother. Have a good one now.
Appreciate it. You have a good one.
Man, we're just having a really great conversation. Please check us out, Facebook Live, YouTube. Tune in to us today. And if you have any questions for any of our guests, please send them for us, because we want to ask them, because we want your voice to be heard today as we talk about equity. So I have the privilege of bringing on our next guest, who we are both Zips. We both went to University of Akron. She was a star student athlete for the women's basketball team, and just a heck of a player with a killer crossover. Now she's doing really great things in the Akron Public Schools district when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion. She is a specialist at this subject. So we felt like it's important that we need to bring someone on that can talk to us about what does equity look like when it comes to education, not only within our district, but our district in comparison to other districts. And are things equitable across the board? And if not, how do we get that? And one of the ways I know that, and man, Robert just said it, right? He said it has to be a change in policy, because why? Systems have to change. The systems have to change. So I know Erica's out there, so we'll get ready to bring her on right now. Eric, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Brother Kemp. How are you?
You know what? I'm doing well. No complaints. It's a nice day despite the little bit of rain, little bit of grayness. I know we are getting there eventually, where the sun is out a little bit more consistently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is Ohio, where we definitely get to acknowledge all seasons. So definitely used to it. Yeah.
That's right. Erica, listen, you've been in this field for a long time. You've been a voice, a powerful voice, I think, advocating not just for us as a school district, but for our young people. The first question I want to ask you is how do we define equity when we look at education?
Right. Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the great introduction. I like to say that I am a lifelong learner. I like to also say that I'm always on a journey of becoming. And I say that because when we talk about equity, is something that we're working towards, right? I'm not sure that we ever truly arrive at a space where we are at the level of expertise that we want to be. And it's important to first, make that statement so that folks understand, that work around equity. And when I talk about equity, I'm oftentimes moving beyond, and Dr. Bettina Love talks about this all the time, about this space where students are just surviving, right? So when you're talking about educational equity, you're really talking about what are the resources, what are the needs of students so that they're able to thrive, right? So we have public school systems and things of that nature, but how do we move beyond to where students are able to thrive, and the predictors or indicators of success are no longer predictors of outcomes? And so if I'm looking at suspension rates, or if I'm looking at achievement gaps, or if I'm looking at placement into special education, or the lack of opportunities into gifted programs, then I'm also considering, are those indicators of success? And if so, then inequities are happening. And so when you're thinking about all the inequities our students experience, think about those data points. And oftentimes we use those data points to look at even racial disparities, because the research, the data will tell you that there are disparities when it comes to equity within education, as it relates to race, as it relates to underrepresented folks, as it relates to marginalized groups of young people as well, like even class. And so those are things we're always looking at and thinking about, and even those systemic pieces of inequities. And when we think about all of the wonderful guests that you have on here today, it's important to think about how all of these systems interact and impact young people, right? And so if you think about health disparities of young people don't have access to good Medicare, so those are going to affect how they show up in school. Housing, students who may be homeless, that's going to affect how they come to school, which will ultimately affect achievement, attendance, disengagement, distraction, and things of that nature. And so when I'm thinking about equity, I'm thinking about how are we meeting those needs of those particular students.
Man, that's really great. What I appreciate about what you said, at no point, Erica, that I feel that you were saying, give our kids a handout and not a hand up, right? And that's why I appreciate it. You said it right. Equity is a becoming thing. We're never going to hit the place of arrival, right? We say that a lot in life, just period. Like, I'm never going to hit the point where I arrive to say, oh man, today I am the absolute best husband I could be to Stacy. Check that box off. I'm done, right? It's a continual process. And you're absolutely right too. Let me just say this, the intersectionality of all of our panelists right now, everybody connects with the plight of this young person. If somebody's homeless, yeah, they're going to show up to school and they're not bringing you an apple, teacher. Like, they're coming in with some things on them, but also on their mind. And we look at and thinking about what Nick shared as far as those overdose stats, those suicide stats within the African-American community, which shot up. This is what some of our young people are having to deal with as well, right? Like, they're dealing with, it's affecting not only their physical health, but also their mental health. So when you look at some of those indicators, Erica, what do those indicators begin to tell us, or what should we be aware of, right? From our district, because people on the outside looking in, and this is why we have you on and our guests, because you all are the experts or the professionals when it comes to equity. We are not. That's why we have you on. But I'm on the outside looking in, and my attitudes towards the school district, I might say, hey, well, our school district has to do a better job with educating our students. Do you really feel like us, as outside the school district, are we taking in to consideration all those indicators that you are mentioning?
Well, what I think is that oftentimes folks may not understand or know, right? And typically, even how we are socialized into becoming, how we socialize our students, how we socialize our educators, how we are socialized as adults. Those are things we're not always speaking to or talking about. But those are the things that really influence how our students show up. So if you're thinking about a student who's homeless, the last thing he or she or they may be thinking about is work. The first thing they may be thinking about is eating, right? But if they get to school late and they miss the opportunity to eat, then that can be cause for some type of negative experience in the classroom or in the hallway or with a staff or even a peer, right? So I think it's first important to understand that all of those indicators we may not understand. I know that there are a lot of school districts that try to do a really good job of communicating what those indicators are. There's definitely information out there on the state report card, on a local report card, for folks to access that information. But I also think that one of the important pieces of disrupting inequities is also being in a community, right? And so when you're in a community and you're able to have conversations that connect cross-culturally within and among different cultures, then you're able to have the conversations to make connections based upon what people know and what they don't know, and even what people assume. And what I will say about being an expert is that we're experts of our own experiences. I say that about our young people. I say that about adults. Right. And so when I'm talking to young people, it's my turn to listen. It's not my turn to to give to or pour on, is my turn to receive. And I think oftentimes we miss that as an opportunity to leverage relationships differently. So even when a student is showing up, not necessarily ready at that moment, but they're there. So that means they are coming for a reason, right? We're not able to leverage that opportunity differently because we're aware of the social political context that our students are entering into that space from.
You know what, Eric? I say the same thing. You know, people ask me to come and talk, and I said, listen, I'm not an expert in this. I'm an expert in my experience.
Right.
And this is how these things have happened to me, because it sometimes it's hard to paint the broad brush, right? I can't do that. I can't paint the broad brush for all Black males or all males in general, all coaches or all whatever. I appreciate you saying that. Well, what do you believe, Eric, as we look at this continuation of equity and diversity, you know, and let's just focus on equity, what are some of the crossroads that you think that as a school district, you think that you guys are facing right now? What crossroads are you facing? Are you know, that you feel like, hey, what's going on right now at this point that we need to acknowledge, but also be able to deal with?
Well, what I'll do is speak from the perspective of just research that I've been, tending to as it relates to just education, generally speaking, across the country, right? And so when we're thinking about the barriers around equity for school districts, you have to think about equity in terms of it being comprehensive. So there is this idea of a comprehensive educational equity. So you want to think about even financial equity, right? Like, how are we spending our dollars? Where might we need to have more resources as a result of inequities that particular buildings face, particular communities face, and things of that nature. And it's also looking at, who are we partnering with, right? And how are we ensuring that that the folks that we're partnering with is aligned to, the goals, the mission around our equity efforts. And I'm seeing school districts and educational institutions across the country being very intentional. I heard Brother Robert talking about that, right? Being very intentional with aligning all areas of the school organization to equity. Right. You're even thinking about, and I think Robert talked about this a little bit. You're looking at how you're recruiting, how you're retaining. Research will tell you that kids benefit, young people benefit from having diverse perspectives, Black and brown educators, and not just Black and brown students benefit from that, right? All students can benefit from that. So how are we even socializing our future educators? And I'm not talking about those that are in college. I'm not even talking about our current. I'm talking about the students in your seat right now. So
Yes.
How are we helping them to even think about equity in ways that they begin to move forward in terms of being their own allies and advocating later? And so that now when they get into the seats of leadership that we're in, these are conversations that are naturally happening. And so it has to be from a holistic perspective of approaching education. We have to look at systems and not look at equity in terms of pockets of isolation or just because of this data point. We really have to look at how systems interact and work through the systems from the top down as it relates to educational institutions across the country. You're watching educational institutions even reimagine what teaching and learning looks like, right? A strong component of cultural response to sustaining teaching. And when you're thinking about it being sustaining, it's not an accessory, right? You're not just bringing in an article about a Black and brown person because it fits in this place in the standard, right? It's how am I being intentional with aligning the experiences of diverse groups of people with the curriculum so it runs parallel to the curriculum. And there's tons of research out there right now around that work that educators and educational institutions are really diving deep into understanding, because I think folks sometimes misunderstand the connection between diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then what is equity in the classroom. Right. And so equity in the classroom is I am going to be culture responsive. And I'm not asking, and we're not asking, and folks understand the difficulty around if I got 20 different cultures, right, in my classroom, is not, as Loretta Hammers will tell you, it's not about fully understanding all 20, but being able to see some commonalities across the different ways that people show up culturally and making connections so that we are moving not just towards inclusiveness, but we're moving towards a sense of belonging.
That's all about, and that's what community is all about, right? We all want to find a place of belonging, regardless of our gender, our ethnicity, generationally, socioeconomically, we all have a place of belonging. Erica, listen, thank you so much for your time today. And Erica, let me ask you this. I don't mean no disrespect, but I'm looking at your bio and it says Erica Glover, PhD. So should I be calling you Dr. Erica?
Nah, you know I prefer Coach E or E.
Okay,
So
okay.
you don't need
Coach
to
E,
call
I
me
can get down with
Dr.
that.
Erica, but
I
thank you. I
keep it down.
appreciate the acknowledgement.
Oh, absolutely. Well, hey, man, you worked and you earned it. And that's what it's all about. And even that gives us that sense of belonging, right? You've earned those letters. And so I want to make sure that I recognize them and I speak that into exactly who you are. But hey, man, I love Coach E because I know Coach E. I can't see Coach E on the court, but I love what you were saying today, sister. Thank you so much for helping to educate all of us when we look at not just the small microscope of equity, but also looking at it from the big picture viewpoint as well. So thank you so much for your time. You got to promise me, man, that you will come back and be with us to keep us educated and updated.
Absolutely. It was an honor to be here. Thank you for even including me in this space. I love the work that you all are doing with Love Akron, and I appreciate you, Brother Kemp.
Absolutely. You take care and have a great, great day.
You too, brother. Thank you.
Man, we just keep on learning and growing here. You know, this is just great stuff, great education, high level leaders being able to be experts in their experiences of what they handle and what they do, just coming on and continue to grow us. This is what Jedi Council is all about. We're not the Jedi Council because we're the experts. We're the Jedi Council because we want to learn more about what justice, equity, diversity, inclusion means and how we can help to be the change that Akron needs and how we can be, if you will, some life sagers, soldiers in that discussion, in that battle that we're doing right now. So listen, I think we have another guest who'll come on. Who do we got next, Lori? Who's coming up next? Man, we got guests everywhere, which is an awesome thing. Because these people are the experts that are coming in, helping to let us know what that's all about.
Yeah. Well, next we have Isaac. Isaac, I do not want to mess up your last name.
Oh, it's totally fine. It's Baez. I think
See, I would have got it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to have you with us. You're here to talk to us. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you hail from? And then we've got some health equity questions for you.
Sure. So I'm Isaac Baez, and I work for the SUMA Health Equity Center. I'm one of their managers there, working with our community health workers to kind of ensure that our patients receive the best quality of health, and then also making sure that they also receive any type of resources that they need. So kind of more of a holistic care, which is like great that we're having these conversations because we are trying to reach that health equity point, showing that example where the physicians, the nurses, the social workers are also working with our community health workers who can do a more equitable approach, and making sure that our patients are receiving any type of supports, whether it's housing, receiving medication assistance, making sure that they're following up with their physicians, transportation needs. It's all around about because, a patient coming into a doctor's appointment and trying to, listen to the physician about a new chronic disease that they get diagnosed, but they're worried about paying rent. They're worried about where they're going to live next or how they're going to get their medication. It's going to be very difficult for them to listen to all that. So we get to deal with that on the other end to make sure that we can help them take care of that while they pay attention of improving their chronic diseases.
Isaac, my guy, I didn't even know something like that existed.
Yeah.
So help me, because I may have missed it in the intro, but if that's happening to them, first of all, how do they get in touch with you or your department?
So if you even go to the SUMA Health website and look up for the Health Equity Center, you can make an appointment. The building was literally built right across the street from where the House of the Lord is at. And it was with the support of the community and even the support of the church too as well, to find a location that at a specific zip code where there's high chronic diseases, and knowing that there needs to be accessibility for the community in those areas. And so we wanted to make sure that we can not only provide these kind of services, but make sure that we're in the location where the community is at. Instead of telling the community to come to us, we needed to go to the community.
Meet them where they're at, right? We got to meet people where they are.
Yep.
Isaac, I don't know if you were on at the beginning and hear some of the stats that Nick set out. And it was just, I mean, my second time really going through those stats, and it's still kind of alarming to me. Hearing those stats, what are some of the things that pop into your mind when you kind of hear those numbers, especially when it comes to overdose, but also suicides amongst African-American males?
When I hear those stats, I think the priority around all is that when we want to reach health equity, we need to have that culturally response approach to making sure that people are receiving services that they feel comfortable with. A lot of times people won't go to certain locations because they don't feel welcome. They don't feel like they're being heard. They don't feel like they're getting the services that are most comfortable to them. And so when we want to try to give people an equitable approach, we need to be able to be open to those different changes and make sure that they're able to receive those services that are comfortable to them. And so that way they are able to actually fulfill those things that they need to do to have change, or even go to like a mental health service. It's hard to go to a therapist, a counselor, but when you're sitting there and that person doesn't understand your culture, where you're coming from, your needs, your aspects, like it's so difficult to tell them what's going on and then tell the person tell you, well, yeah, you just need to change and you got to just do this. And if you just apply this, it's super simple, follow these steps and you'll be good. It doesn't happen that way. Or if they're having drug overdose, when you think about the struggles that they're having or the environment that they're living in, thinking about better ways for them to improve. You can't just tell them to move from their location. You also have to figure out the strategies, how they're going to do it, where they're going to get the money from, where the support is going to happen before you can even figure all those details out, instead of just saying, well, if they just moved and stopped talking to those people, things will change. Those are just like simple aspects on that. And I know I'm making it sound really simple, but it's very complicated when you think about trying to have a very culturally response approach to the community in the way they need it, not the way we think that they need it, but the ways that they feel comfortable in receiving those approaches.
Man, that's so good. So pretty much what you're saying is not one size fits all, right? Everybody has different sizes. And so even that is the diversity approach of it. And I appreciate your consideration, right? Like, I think that's what it kind of comes down to, right? I know there's always this old school language when it comes to doctors or those in the medical profession, or even from a standpoint of mental health profession, it's our bedside manner, right? And so our bedside manner has to be elevated a little bit to say, hey, man, this person, the diagnosis may be the same, right? But they're coming from two different perspectives culturally. And so we have to be able to handle people regarding exactly where they are from a cultural perspective. I wrote that down, man, because I'm using that culturally response approach, or culturally approach. How did you say that?
A culturally response approach.
Yes, that's what it's got to be, man. I love that, because that's going to take us a little bit delving into the uncomfortable, which I think gives us sometimes a little bit of understanding of how uncomfortable it is for that patient, right? It's us putting ourselves in their shoes and say, hey, I know this may be new to you, but here's kind of what I'm here to do. But I think also, Isaac, having that awareness is definitely going to help more people get the help that they need. And hopefully those disparities can come down, or at least sometimes even out. So I really appreciate that, man. And thank you so much for your time today, Isaac, and taking the time to come on and educate us. But also, man, I love this term, man. That's the term that we all have to use in all of our approaches. We approach people that are different from us. What is the culturally response approach with that person? And it may not be mine, but that's something I have to go and find out. So Isaac, man, thank you so much for your time today, man, and for being with us. And you got to promise us, man, like I've made all our guests, that you will come back.
Definitely. Every time.
Yeah.
And Isaac, one more thing. If somebody needs to get a hold of some of the resources that SUMA offers in this, where do they need to go? Could you give your email or website?
Yeah, my email is available if anybody has any follow-up question. It is biasn@sumahealth.org. And you can reach out to me to ask any follow-up questions. And if you go onto the SUMA Health website, you'll be able to find some of the resources. We have a lot of other programs that we offer to the community. We have different exercise programs for health and wellness, and we even have a program called the Sweet Life that's able to help promote pre-diabetic, pre-hypertensive method. We work with the minority behavioral health systems. We work with local community members that do the exercise. So they are representatives of the communities that are very involved in supporting the community and making sure that they have more of a preventable approach on reducing chronic diseases. So we are very focused on listening to the community, working with the community, and making sure that we balance that out. And it's not just us saying, hey, we have a program and we want to bring this to you, and the community looks at you and says, I didn't even ask for that. It's more of that approach of, hey, we have people from the community who know and get you and want to show you a better way of living life. And so it makes it easier into that transition of helping bridge those gaps that exist and building that trust, because we've lost a lot of trust with our communities in the health system. And we have a lot of work to do to regain that back.
Man, that's really great, because it's really tying into what Brother Robert was saying about that sponsorship, right? How do we sponsorship and leverage this on behalf of SUMA, and also those people that are coming on behalf of the community to advocate on the needs? Man, that's really great, man. Thank you so much again, Isaac, just for your time today and the education that you brought us, man, of how equity is working at a healthcare level.
Sure.
Isaac, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, you too.
That's amazing, Coach. I'm familiar with the Equity Center there for SUMA. As a matter of fact, my dad was a patient. Dr. Pankey was his doctor, and they've always done a really, really good job. I know they do cooking classes, they do line dance classes. I mean, there's so many fun things that they do, exciting things that they do to help the community get healthy and stay well. And so, what an amazing conversation. Well, Coach, I know you're leaving me, but that's okay. I got Tom and Tori that are going to come and join me today. Tom Fuller is with the Alpha Phi Alpha Homes, and we're going to talk about housing equity today. Something that's near and dear to my heart. A little later on, we'll bring Tori on, and she knows that she and I have had these conversations over the years, because it is my heart's desire, especially with this next generation, to see them up and out, owning their own homes, creating opportunities for generational wealth for their families. So, Tom, if you're still here, it's been an exciting time. Welcome, welcome.
I am here. Can you hear me?
All right. Good to have you. It was so good speaking with you the other day. I want to tell our viewing audience, this guy here is a wealth of knowledge. We talked about the Inner Belt Project. We talked about so many different things. And I was like, Tom, we got to have you back another day to talk about some of those other things that we discussed. But I want you to know my wheels have just been turning ever since our conversation. It was insightful and invigorating. I don't know how else to describe how I felt as I began to really dive a little deeper in my thought as it related to home equity, and how some of the barriers do exist in our community, especially in the Black community, that are perhaps in some cases barriers that we have the power to remove. So talk to us a little bit today about, when you hear the term home equity, what does that mean to you?
Well, home equity is basically the interest that you have in your home, and it's a technical term that is used in banking and finance, and it means that if you have cash to buy a home, you have the equity that you put into it is the money that you put into that home, and not many people can buy a home with cash. They need to borrow. So if they borrow, then the equity that they put in is their down payment, and they accumulate equity over the course of paying off that mortgage. So as they make their monthly payments, their equity increases. And that's an important factor in terms of wealth accumulation in this country, because home ownership is one of the principal and probably the first way that people can accumulate wealth. And that has been an issue with the African American community because they have been excluded historically from access to home ownership, and it hasn't just been a cultural thing; it's been a legal matter. And one of the things that we were talking about the other day was that that understanding of the history of the United States and in our community as well is that we always thought of de jure segregation as being something that was practiced in the South, where the Jim Crow laws were preventing people from performing various rights, and including home ownership. And in the North, it was segregation, particularly, was identified as something that was de facto, not supported by law. But the document, the book that we were talking about, was The Color of Law, which is subtitled the Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. It was written by Richard Rothstein, came out in 2017, and it documents in great detail the history of the government action to separate Black and white families and people over a period of time. And this predated the establishment of the New Deal agencies. But that's where most of the focus of the book lies. And those agencies, including FHA, redlined areas where they would not provide government insured loans. And those were, they identified those areas on the basis of the number of African Americans that lived in those areas. And that's not the only one. There are a lot of other agencies that supported the movement of and the development of suburban areas and developments that got government support and financial support and legal support to restrict the occupancy of those suburbs. And in other words, they were for whites only, and Blacks were excluded. And highway system, we were talking about the Interbelt and how highway location and development was used by the government to demolish African American neighborhoods, and particularly businesses that were affected by that. So there's a long history, and why is it important now? The history is important because that wealth that could have been accumulated wasn't accumulated by African American families, and that affects us even today, because what you might have inherited from your grandparents that were excluded from this system of home ownership would have given you a leg up in terms of your life, your ability to go to college, your ability to live a more satisfying life, and have the means to do that. So it's important today, and it's more than just the laws and the practices that were in place 50 years ago. Because these are constitutional issues that caused government to be used to separate and segregate, and the impact is continuing on.
Absolutely. So, Tom, let me ask you this. I'm going to bring Tori on just a minute, because I do want to talk about some ways that folks can, purchase homes and some of the obstacles, but ways we can lead them. We can give them some solutions today. What role would you say that Alpha Phi Alpha Homes plays in providing affordable housing, Could you explain, when you and I were talking, you mentioned the term being up and out versus being trapped. And then can you share a suggested way that individuals can take advantage of the programs and services, through Alpha Phi Alpha homes that are designed to help them experience what I would call the American dream, which is homeownership? Big question.
Yeah.
Big question to answer in about like 3 minutes, right? 2 minutes, right?
We've at Alpha Homes, we have developed 2,400 units of housing over the years, and a lot of that housing is targeted to senior individuals and couples, and those folks who are eligible to live in that senior housing are generally beyond the age and the season of life in which they would be considering owning their own home. They may have owned their own home at one time, gave it up, and are no longer interested. So the folks that have the potential and desire to own their own home are a minority of those that we serve and we provide housing to. And those are the folks that Tori works with to prepare them for home ownership. We serve the same group of people who are eligible for some of our housing, and the intent is to allow them to live in subsidized housing, to reduce the amount of rent that they're going to be paying, to put them in a position where they might be able to purchase a home, and that's our desire to do that. We do provide services and not directly, but they're provided by the city service programs and agencies that work with us, and they have access to our property and meeting rooms, and we encourage that kind of service to be available. We don't provide any direct services for home ownership, but our role is more to support them with subsidized housing where they're going to pay 30% of their income for rent, and we've been doing that since 1972. So
Yeah.
Tori's more involved in preparing them for home ownership than we have been.
Yeah, but I think with all the discussion that I've had, the biggest deal is that if the work that Alpha Phi Alpha does with providing affordable housing, it makes it, it gives an individual who doesn't make a whole bunch of money the opportunity to have the ability to save some money while they're working and living in an affordable situation. Tori, what are some of the issues that, so we talk about FHA, we talk about loans, we talk about home ownership, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the issues that you've identified as HUD approved housing agencies. What are some of the major obstacles for minority home buyers to purchase homes?
Good morning, or good afternoon, Pastor Porter. Yes, you're 100% right. There are some major obstacles that minorities and low-income families have. You can start off with credit. There are some individuals that don't have credit. There are individuals that have credit, but they have used a lot of it, so their line of credit, they're at to the max of their line of credit, or they have some outstanding debts that they have not paid. Then you have also savings, because many of these populations are at a low income rate, so they don't have much to save. So savings is a big problem. And then what we also have recognized is that we have not only income and products together that could be an obstacle, because the average affordable home in Akron is around $60,000 to $80,000. So right now, with the market being the way it is, the average house and rent and all of those different things have climbed higher that can be affordable for individuals. That's the obstacles that we're seeing, where now the houses that were 60 and 80,000 are now 100 and 150, and the rentals are now they were $600 and now they're up to $1,000.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. So what programs and services are available to assist? I know the work that you do at Mustard Seed, and the work that, that Alpha Phi Alpha Homes is doing, and the work that, Tom Fuller and his group is doing. Those, ideally, those housing units should provide a way for people to save and find a hand up. So if they will take advantage of programs that are suggested, they could save money. They could, with your organization, Mustard Seed, they can build credit. What is available to individuals to assist them, low income, assist families to purchase and maintain being a homeowner?
Well, one of the things that, like with Tom's organization, and I'm grateful to be in that group of services where they solicit grants for their projects, so that maybe a $300,000 house or a $250,000 house really doesn't cost that much for the affordability, because they get grants from the state and from other locations. Then we have the branches like the individual local lenders that are wanting to contribute back into the community. So they may be offering, like their federal may be offering the large down payment assistance options for people to be able to get in for down payment and closing costs. And then we have our state programs that are offering up to 5% of the purchase price in regards to down payment assistance and closings. That's some of the ways that individuals don't have to come to the table with all their own money. They can put these sources together.
Okay. So we're out of time, man. So let me ask you this in our closing. I'm going to just give each of you about maybe 45 seconds. Tori, we'll start with you, and then Tom. When you look at the future of Summit County, what challenges do you foresee with affordable housing? And if you could give one suggestion to a person that would love to become a homeowner, but perhaps doesn't make $100,000 a year, maybe they can only afford a $500 a month mortgage. What is the challenge? And then what do you suggest? If you could just give one bit of suggestion to them, what would you advise? We'll start with Tori, and then we'll finish up with Tom. Thank you.
Well, with our program, we help individuals to understand that we do need to look at our budgets a little bit differently in order to find those sources that we can put aside for savings. This is going to be very important for the household to maybe change some of their behaviors and their attitudes towards spending. And if they could do that along with the other sources, get with programs like Mustard Seed and some of the other housing counseling agencies where their lenders will provide some other sources, home ownership is possible.
Beautiful. Thank you. Tom, what would you say?
Well, I would say that the key is increasing the income of the individuals and the families, and that doesn't happen overnight, and they have to work over time with counselors like Tori to change their budget capacity and get in a position to own a home. There are plenty of people out there who are not in that position, and I mentioned the seniors as being part of that group, and others that have not accumulated enough wealth or had the level of income that they can support home ownership. And home ownership isn't just payment of the mortgage payment. It's also being able to pay the utilities, pay the insurance, maintain the property. And property is not cheap to maintain. If you own it, you are responsible for keeping it up and operating. And when I worked for the city, I had a situation where I helped a person get into home ownership, and I guess my counseling wasn't as good as Tori's because she called a couple months later and asked us to come out and change her hot water tank, and it wasn't the way it worked as a homeowner. That's your problem and your responsibility, and unfortunately she didn't have the income to take care of it, but she found a way. But that's being realistic about who can and who cannot own property and the cost of ownership. And that takes diligent counseling and expert counseling to get people to that point.
Yeah. Thank you all. There's another word I love, and it's called discipline. There's some disciplines that go with all of that, that if, we're used to eating out, sometimes eating home is less expensive. If we're used to, the cable that's, $300, I honestly went and bought an antenna, guys, because there was nothing on TV I wanted to watch. And I thought, why am I paying all this money when I really just want to watch Channel 19 and maybe some Ion periodically, right? So, right, you learn all those things when you hang out with Tori over at Mustard Seed. We're going to put in the chat and on the screen ways that you can reach all of our guests today. Thank you, Tom, and thank you so much, Tori. I wish we had another 20 minutes because this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I would love to get together with you and some other folks and do another live just specifically for home ownership, because I think that my parents, that was a big deal. My generation, a big deal. But it just looks like people don't understand the benefit of owning your own. I'm like, if you're renting, then you're paying off somebody else's house. And at the end of the day, they're taking vacation on Florida on your dime after they've paid that house off. So thank you all for being with us.
Thank you, Lori.
Today.
Thank
And
you.
I'd like to say to each of our guests that have been with us today, both Mr. Tom Fuller with Alpha Phi Alpha Homes, Nicholas Beckel, I don't know if I said it right, Nick. I pray I did, from the ADM board. Isaac Baez from the Summa Health Equity Center. Pastor Robert D. Drenette from the Akron Chamber, also the pastor of St. Ashworth Temple. Tori Stokes with Mustard Seed. And Dr., let us get it right, Dr. Erica, that took a lot of work, Dr. Erica Glover. Thank you from the Akron Board of Education. Thank you all for being with us on today. Check us out at loveakron.org. Keep in touch, follow up, and find out when our lives are coming. We'd love to have you with us. Don't forget to like and to share. And always send your questions. You can reach us at area code 330-384-8124. Thank you again to all of our guests for joining us. And we'll see you in just a few minutes. I think there's another live. The One City is following me at 1:30. So stay tuned. Check us out on Facebook and YouTube. See ya. And remember, if you don't do anything else, make sure that you love Akron. See you later.